and then suddenly you throw him into the start lineup, and he hasn't had any reps with the first team at all. Think about that. So you're just going to throw him to the wolves like that, huh?
Did you want to? Well, he's developed young players, maybe not young quarterback. Which young quarterback did you want him to develop?
The ones that's on your roster.
Dan Orlovsky did not expect to become the lightning rod for one of the ugliest debates in recent NFL media memory. But the moment he stepped in front of a microphone to defend Kevin Stefanski, the fuse was lit. What started as a routine take about a fired head coach quickly spiraled into a full-blown media firestorm, dragging former MVP Cam Newton into the center of the conversation and exposing a deep divide between how former players and career analysts view accountability in the NFL. By the time the dust settled, this was no longer just about Stefanski's exit from Cleveland. It became a referendum on quarterback development, coaching responsibility, and whether some voices in sports media are completely disconnected from what actually happens inside locker rooms. Orlovsky's position was simple, at least on the surface. He argued that Kevin Stefanski is a good coach, even a great one, and that his firing by the Cleveland Browns was less an indictment of his ability and more a casualty of instability at quarterback. Orlovsky went as far as suggesting that Stefanski would quickly land another head coaching job, portraying him as a misunderstood offensive mind who never got a fair shake. In a vacuum, it sounded like a reasonable, measured take.
When you hire a guy like Kevin Stefanski, first and foremost, he's an offensive mind. Yep. The offense for the Cleveland Browns were in the bottom half of the wrong position or in the wrong statistic.
But Cam Newton wasn't listening from a vacuum. He was listening as someone who played quarterback at the highest level, who lived inside NFL systems, and who understood exactly how much power a head coach wields over a quarterback's success or failure. Newton's response was immediate and explosive. He didn't hedge, he didn't soften his words, and he didn't try to play peacemaker. He went straight for the jugular, laying out a series of facts that made Orlovsky's defense of Stefanski sound detached from reality. 13 quarterbacks. That was the number Newton kept coming back to. 13 different quarterbacks cycled through Cleveland during Stefanski's tenure. 13 opportunities to identify, develop, and stabilize the most important position in sports. And, according to Newton, Stefanski failed every single time. This wasn't emotional venting. Newton framed it as a cold, brutal assessment of results. One playoff appearance back in 2019, and even that achievement came with an asterisk in Newton's eyes, given the talent on that roster. Outside of that brief moment, there was no sustained success, no clear offensive identity, and no quarterback who emerged better than when he arrived. For Newton, that wasn't bad luck. That was evidence.
13 different quarterbacks. I don't care what the name on the back of their jersey says. That has to be said to something. When you have guys in this league.
Where Orlovsky tried to shift blame toward the quarterbacks themselves, Newton shut that door immediately. He rejected the idea that rotating through quarterbacks automatically absolves the head coach. In fact, he argued the opposite. If a coach goes through that many quarterbacks without developing even one into a reliable starter, the problem stops being the players. It becomes the system, the preparation, the coaching philosophy. Newton made it clear that quarterback development isn't a side responsibility for a head coach, it is the job. And by that standard, Stefanski failed. But Newton didn't stop at broad criticism. He zeroed in on a specific example that, in his view, perfectly captured everything wrong with Stefanski's approach: the handling of Shedeur Sanders. Sanders arrived in Cleveland with massive expectations, touted as one of the most gifted young quarterbacks to enter the league in years. Talent was never the question. The concern was whether the Browns would actually give him a real chance to succeed. According to Newton, they didn't. Stefanski's decision to deny Sanders first-team reps during training camp became a central point of outrage. For a young quarterback, those reps are everything. They're how timing is built, how trust is formed, how the speed of the NFL starts to feel manageable instead of overwhelming. And Sanders didn't get them. Not one meaningful opportunity to work with the starters, not a real chance to establish chemistry, not the basic foundation most young quarterbacks are given. Then came the part that pushed the situation from questionable to reckless. Stefanski inserted Sanders into live game action anyway. No preparation, no rhythm, no safety net. He was thrown into the fire and expected to survive. Newton didn't mince words when describing it. To him, it was setting a young quarterback up to fail and then blaming him when things went sideways. What made the situation even more infuriating was that Sanders didn't crumble. Despite the lack of preparation, he competed, he studied, he fought. And when the moment finally came where he had a chance to fully showcase his ability, he delivered in a way that should have silenced all doubt. The game against the Tennessee Titans became the defining snapshot of the entire controversy. Sanders was electric. 4 touchdown passes, calm under pressure, command of the huddle. He dragged Cleveland back into a game that looked lost, injecting life into a stadium that had been preparing for disappointment. Momentum swung entirely in the Browns' favor, and Sanders looked every bit like a franchise quarterback finding his footing. Then came the decision that turned disbelief into outrage. With the game on the line and Sanders clearly in rhythm, Stefanski pulled him. Instead of trusting the quarterback who had just orchestrated one of the most impressive comebacks of the season, Stefanski shifted gears, handed the ball to Isaiah Judkins, and altered the entire offensive approach. The result was a collapse. The final drive fell apart. The Browns lost a game they had every reason to win. Newton didn't hesitate to place the blame exactly where he believed it belonged. That loss wasn't on Sanders. It wasn't on the defense. It was on the sideline. It was a coaching decision that ignored momentum, ignored confidence, and ignored the very thing coaches claim to value: most players rising to the moment. And that wasn't the end of it. As more stories emerged, Stefanski's tenure began to look darker. Reports surfaced suggesting a pattern of retaliation against players who questioned decisions or didn't fit neatly into his vision. Players allegedly being removed from games or even deactivated under the guise of injuries. Injury reports that didn't quite add up. Situations that raised eyebrows inside the building long before they reached the public. The allegations involving Shedeur Sanders were particularly troubling. Twice during the season, Sanders was listed as injured and unavailable. Twice, sources close to the situation claimed those designations were questionable at best. According to those reports, Sanders was healthy enough to play, but was sidelined anyway. Whether it was to maintain control, avoid admitting earlier mistakes, or protect an offensive scheme that wasn't working, the implication was damning. Using injury reports as a tool to manage narratives and playing time crosses a line in the eyes of players. Trust, once broken, doesn't come back easily. When you stack all of this together, Newton's anger begins to feel less like a hot take and more like an overdue reckoning. This wasn't about one bad season or one unlucky quarterback. This was about a pattern. A head coach who failed to develop talent, mismanaged success when it appeared, and allegedly manipulated circumstances to avoid accountability. The debate reached another level when Stephen A. Smith weighed in. Smith, rarely shy about delivering blunt assessments, echoed Newton's stance and added even more weight to the argument. 6 years, 13 quarterbacks, 0 franchise answers. In a league defined by quarterback play, that resume is devastating. Smith framed it as an inescapable truth. When you're given that many chances to solve the most important position in sports and you fail every time, you've proven you're not the right person for the job. Suddenly, Orlovsky's defense looked isolated. What he framed as nuance began to look like excuse-making. The contrast between Orlovsky and Newton highlighted a deeper tension in sports media. Analysts often talk about scheme, X's and O's, and theoretical upside. Former players talk about trust, preparation, and lived consequences. Newton wasn't arguing theory, he was arguing reality. In the end, the Stefanski debate became bigger than one coach. It became a conversation about accountability, about whether coaches should be judged on intent or results, about whether media narratives protect certain figures while ignoring the experiences of the players affected by their decisions. Cam Newton's message was clear and unapologetic. Kevin Stefanski didn't just fail. He failed repeatedly with ample opportunity to succeed, and the consequences were earned. The Browns have moved on. Stefanski's era in Cleveland is over. And no matter how loudly some try to rewrite the story, the numbers remain. 13 quarterbacks, no sustained success, no development. That's not bad luck. That's a verdict.